Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Membet in Masechet Chullin. We are beginning the third chapter of Masechet Chullin. Let me share my screen and we will get started. This third chapter is not easy. This is, I could just say from even just this first daf, and I haven't done the entire chapter yet, it is a lot of bovine biology. I do not know bovine biology very well. Thankfully, the art scroll has a number of pictures. I'll do my best to show them when I think they're particularly relevant. I don't know that any pictures are particularly relevant at the moment, but so the concepts are sufficient for today's daf, but hopefully as we go through, we'll get some better feel. Today's Mishnah, the Mishnah at the beginning of today's daf, is based on the pasuk in Shmot, Perek Kafbet, pasuk Lamed, which says the following: "The Anshe Kodesh Tiyun Li, you should be a holy people to me. Uvasar basaded terefa lo sochelu, and the meat in the field of a treifa, which is undefined. We'll have to figure out what that is. Lo sochelu, you should not eat. Now, teref suggests torn in some manner, and we'll see that it usually means some kind of missing item. La kelev tashlichun oso, you send it, you throw it to the dogs. Now, when we say that you throw something to the dogs, that effectively means that you are allowed to benefit from it. It doesn't have to be burned or otherwise destroyed. You can benefit from it. And so that is the halacha associated with the treifa that you can't eat it, but you can throw it to the dogs. So we need to identify what constitutes a treifa, right? The simple meaning is of a treifa is the animal that was attacked and mortally wounded, cannot be eaten. That's the simple meaning of that verse. As we saw earlier in Chulin, we asked the question, well, maybe it means a verse, the animal was killed in the field through because it was torn. Well, we know that it can't mean that because we have a separate word for that. That is called a nevela. A nevela is an animal that was killed in the field and not killed through a ritual slaughter. And so and the Torah separately forbids that. So as a result, we know that this reference of the Torah to treifa needs to be something that's torn but not dead. And so that's how we come to the meaning that we just developed, that and we're going to see that the same law, just as if it was, if this animal were, for example, attacked by another animal, attacked by a lion, let's say, and is now mortally wounded, that the same thing is true even if it happened through natural causes. It got stuck between a rock and a hard place. It had some kind of disease and thereby developed these wounds. So all of those are also called a treifa. What is not called a treifa is an animal that is old. An old animal that has nothing wrong with it other than its old age is not considered a treifa. That is called a misukenet, sort of like a danger of death kind of situation, something that's at the danger of death. And that is and that we saw in the last chapter is actually potentially a kosher animal, as long as you know for certain that through the entire shchita process, through the entire ritual slaughter process, that it was still alive. And how do we know that? We know that it's still alive because of the um, post-mortem movements of the animal after you complete the shechita. If it has those post-mortem movements, so then we'll know that the animal was alive throughout the entire shechita process. Okay, so with that, we're now going to pick up near the top of Membet Amud Aleph, and we're going to list 18 different trephas. So elu trephas bivehema. Here are the trephos that we have among the animals. Nikuvas haveshet. We saw this one previously. This is an esophagus that is punctured. We saw that any kind of puncture, and Rashi tells us, elu trephos, kol nekev b'mashahu. Whenever we say the word nekev, it means, and so this is nikuvat, that's a nekev. Every time we say punctured, we mean any size puncture. Even a very small puncture is sufficient to make that animal a treifa. Upsukat hagargeret, and then so that's so again a puncture in the esophagus. Psukat hagargeret, a severing of the trachea. And Rashi reminds us that when it comes to the trachea, we've seen this one as well already. Lirachba beruba. It means second Rashi on the Mishnah. It means that the width of it, the majority of the width, has been torn, and so that is the situation with respect to the trachea being severed. Nikav kerum shel moach. If the membrane of the brain was punctured. Nikav halev lebeit chalula. What?
Those are called meninges.
Oh, meninges. Okay, great. In nikav halev lebeit chalalo. If the heart was punctured so that it goes into the chambers. Nishbara hashidra. If the spine was broken, the nifsak hachutshala, and its cord was severed. So it seems like that is considered one item, meaning that both of them have happened. Or either it's not clear whether it's both or either. Number 6 is nital hakaved velonish dayer hemenu klum. The liver was removed and none of it was left. Hareya shenikva, there was a puncture in the lung. O shechasra, or there was something missing from the lung. Rabbi Shimon Omer ad shetinakev lebeis hasimponos. That when it says that something is missing or punctured on the lung, it means that it's got to be punctured all the way down to the simponos. Rashi notes that these are the tanot. These are the like small tubes. That it says here are the bronchi. So nikva hakeva.
The bronchi are the larger ones, and bronchioles are smaller ones.
Oh, okay. So I guess it's all relative to the size, I guess, of the trachea. That they're smaller than the width of the trachea. But in any event, the next item is a puncture of the what it says here is abomasum, which is the fourth stomach of the 4 stomachs of a bovine. So nikva hamara, the gallbladder was punctured. Nikvu hadakin, the intestines were punctured. Hakarem hapnimis shenikva, or the inner paunch. The paunch is the first stomach of the animal, and if its inner side was punctured, that would be a problem. Oshenikra rov hachitzona, or the outer part was actually torn to the majority of it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda qualifies this majority. It's not for every animal that you need a majority. Hagadola tefach, a large animal requires a tefach of a tear, whereas vakatana beruba, it's only a smaller animal. And by smaller and larger, we're basically cows and bulls are larger, sheep and goats are smaller. And so for a smaller animal, then you need the tear to be a majority. But for a larger animal, even a tefach is going to be sufficient to make it a treifa. Hemseis uveis hakosos shenikvu lachutz. If the omasum, which again, that was the I'm sorry, the omasum is the third stomach. If the omasum or the reticulum, which is the second stomach, are punctured, all through to the outside, meaning that it's punctured through and through. Nafla min hagag, or now this is one where you don't necessarily see any internal organ damage, but it fell from a roof. And we can assume that it's problematic. And Rashi tells us that we're dealing with a situation. Naflam min Agag, third to last line in the narrow lines of Rashi. Naflam min Agag, v'shachta miyad, and you slaughtered it immediately. Trefa, that would be considered a trefa. Aval pisha ain shever niraba, even though nothing's broken in the item. Choshishin, we're worried, shenisrasku v'nisparku aveira. We're worried that there are some, other internal damage that you cannot see. Ve'ain tam betrefas, and there's no special reason for trefot. Shalach Moshe miSinai, that they are a halakha from Moshe that Moshe got at Har Sinai, not necessarily detailed in the Torah, but is tradition. So we'll deal with the last piece of that Rashi when we get to the Gemara on Nun Aleph, but that's the basic situation of the case of an animal that fell from the roof. Because if you let it stay around for 24 hours, it's actually, you know what, we can just do it. It's the Uba Gemara, and then the Gemara will see on Dav Nun Aleph Bet Amar She'im Shasam 8 if you wait a 24-hour period, Vishachta, and it's still alive, and you slaughter it at that point, then it's kshera. Even if it doesn't necessarily stand at that time, we'll see that that's going to be at least one opinion that will say that that is an okay animal. Back into the Mishnah. So the Mishnah says we're now 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up from where it says Gemara in the Gemara. Nishtabru rov tzaloseha. If most of the ribs are broken, that's another situation that the animal would be considered a treifa. And then udrasas hazaev, and one that has been attacked and clawed by a wolf is also going to be a treifa. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, drusas has a bidaka. When it comes to a smaller animal, that's where a wolf will be sufficient. But udrusas ari bagasa, but you need to have a bigger a lion attack a larger animal. Otherwise, that's not going to be really life-threatening. Drusas hanetz ba'of hadaf. When it comes to a nate's clawing, which is some kind of like here it says that it is some kind of hawk, that a hawk's attack on a smaller animal, that ba'of hadak, a smaller animal, a smaller bird, that is going to be sufficient to make that bird a treifa. Udrusas hagas, but it takes a larger animal's attack, ba'of hagas, with a larger a bird. So, and only a large, this particular kind of hawk is not the very large hawk. It's called a sparrow hawk, at least in here. But the bottom line is that it is a smaller attacking animal, and so as a result, only smaller birds will suffer and become a treifa if they are attacked by it. Larger birds would not. And similarly, when it comes to a large bird, so if a large bird attacks, so then that is going to be sufficient to to cause a treifa for another large bird. Ze'aklal. Here's the general rule for our conversation. Kol she'ein kamo chaya treifa. Anything that, like that situation, it is not going to be able to live, that is considered a treifa. Okay, so there we have it. That's the Mishnah. That's the general rule. And now we continue with the Gemara. The Gemara is going to seek the source for treifa and expresses surprise at the way the question is posed. So let's see. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, remez l'treifa min Torah minayin. Where do we have a hint about the treifa in the Torah. So the Gemara immediately asks on this question, Minayin, where? How could you possibly ask that question? It's an explicit pasuk. Ubasar basadet treifa lo tochelu. The meat in the that was torn in the field, you cannot eat it. So of course, this is again Shmos Parakah Bet pasuk lamed. So how can that be your question? Ella remez l'treifa she'ena chayim in a Torah minayin. No, the question is really, how do I know that a treifa is an animal that cannot live in its current state, according to the Torah? So the Katani Seva, and the question is based on the last line of our Mishnah. Zeh klal kol she'en kamo chayat treifa. How do anything that the general rule is that an animal that where some other animal affected similarly would not be able to live, that kind of animal is a treifa. So miklal de treifa eina chaya. That implies that a treifa doesn't have the ability to live. So minalan, how do I know that? So effort number one to answer this question. So diksiv. Zos hachaya asher tochlu. These are the animals. These are the chaya, and chaya obviously can have both the root of chai, of living, and chaya also refers to a variety of wild animals. So these are the wild animals, and these are the animals that you can eat. But it's also saying chaya echol. You can eat live animals, she'ena chaya, but animals that cannot survive, lo techol. You cannot eat them. Miklal de treifa lo chaya. So that's what implies that a treifa is unable to live. So now I understand that according to the opinion in our Mishnah that says that a treifa has to be able to survive. But we are going to see that there is another opinion that says that a treifa doesn't necessarily have to be an animal that cannot survive. It can even include animals that can live for a longer time. What is the person who the opinion that says that a treifa can be a living animal, an animal that will stay alive? How do they understand this, or how do they know that that's the case? Because obviously we have this lesson which contradicts it. So nafkale mizos hachaya asher tochlu. You can do it from the exact same words. Because what do we say? Zozachaya asher tochlu. This is the chaya that you're going to be able to eat. This is the living animal that you're going to be eat, implying Zozachaya echol chaya acheres lo techal. There's this kind of animal which you're allowed to eat when it's alive, and there's another kind of animal that you're not allowed to eat when it's alive. And so miklal de treifa chaya, that implies what kind of animal that you're not allowed to eat, even though it's going to survive. It's the treifa. And so that is how the other opinion would say. V'idach, well, okay, you great point. So now, if you're taking the opinion that a treifa is an animal that cannot survive, well, then how would you understand the zos? Hi zos my avidle. How do you understand the fact that it says this animal? This always is an idea that you could point to. So mi boy Tana of debei Rabbi Yishmael. They use it like the Tana of Rabbi Yishmael. The Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael. Zos hachaya asher tochlu. This is the animal that you can eat. Milamed shetafas hakodesh baruch hu mikol minu min v'hera lo Moshe. God took an example of every species and literally showed them to Moshe, so Moshe would know which animals are kosher and which animals are not. And that's why the Torah uses the term zos. Zos is a pointing. And so Hashem was pointing to each animal for Moshe's benefit, to understand it, so that he would know which ones. And God was saying, here's what you can eat, here's what you can't eat. So v'idach nami mi baile, look at the Tana Tabei Rabbi Yishmael. But 1 second, if you're the opinion that says that zos ahachaya sher tochlu is teaching us that this is the living animal that you can eat, and that there's another living animal that you can't eat, well, you can't also use that same pasuk to teach us what we just heard, the fact that Moshe was shown every single animal. You can't learn two things from one pasuk if there isn't, unless there's something extra about those words. So, you know what? Ein Hakanami, you're absolutely right. That is not the actual source from which the opinion says that a treifa is can be an animal that is able to live. Ela treifa chaya minole. How does the opinion that say that a treifa is not necessarily an animal that is going to die within a year, but rather is an animal that could even live a long time, but it has one of these wounds? How do they know that in fact the animal that if an animal can live, it still could be a treifa? You know what? They learned it from another teaching that came out of the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. The Tana debei Rabbi Yishmael, as we have another brisa that says, "Bein chaya hanelachelet ubein chaya asher lo teachel." Later on in Vayikra, this is Perek Yud Aleph Pasuk Mem Zayin. So it says that we're going to distinguish between the chaya that can be eaten and the chaya that cannot be eaten. And so that's the pasuk that shows that there is a chaya. Again, literally in the pasuk's context, it means a particular an animal. These are the animals that are can be eaten and cannot be eaten. But in the context of the lesson that we're trying to learn from it is that these are the living animals, the animals that have the capability of living for another year that can be eaten, and these are the ones that cannot be eaten. And so as a result, Elu Shmona Esrei Treifot Shenamru Lamoshe Misinai. The Baraisa concludes that this verse, when it says that these are the chaya that cannot be eaten, it's referring to the 18 kinds of treifas that we had that Moshe was taught at Har Sinai. So now, having in passing mentioned the fact that there are 18, and noting the fact that our Mishnah listed 18, the Gemara now asks, Vesuleka, are there no other ones besides 18, and assuming that it's the 18 that are listed in our Mishnah? Va'ika Baskar, there are the ones that could be categorized under the acronym Baskar, which isn't perfectly an acronym, but it's close to it. We'll see how it goes. Vishav Shmaitusa, and what about the 7 teachings? Those are all other cases of treifot. So aren't those also going to be things that are that should be categorized? Meaning we have another 11 that should be on our list. So the number shouldn't be 18, but rather should be 29. So Bishlam the Tana Didan, when it comes to our Mishnah, although it lists 18, he doesn't mention a number explicitly. The Tana Udashayir Asya Bezek Haklal, that he taught the ones he taught, and then he added at the very end a general rule. So the general rule will cover the 11 items that aren't listed in our Mishnah. But Elalatana debe Rabbi Yishmael. But according to the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael that taught this brisa that listed the Amar Shmona Esrei Treifos, that listed 18, Vesuleka, are there no more? Va'ika, there are more. And so we're now going to start with the Baskar. So this is the bet item. Behema shenechtechu ragleha min ha'arkuba ulamala treifa. There's the animal where the hind legs have been cut off above a joint. Not clear exactly which joint it means, but the bottom line is that they've been cut off at that point. That's going to be considered a treifa. So that wasn't mentioned in our Mishnah. So why not? So isn't that a 19th item? So Savar like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. It must be that the Brisa is holding like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. To Amar Yecholahi likabot v'lichyot. That animal that is capable, that had the legs cut off, is able to live because it can be the joints can be cauterized, and so as a result, that's going to still be able to survive. One second though, fine, you were going to tell me that it can live. But Laman Ka'amar, who was it that taught this brisa that said that there were 18 trephod? Latana Debe Rabbi Yishmael. It was the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. And Tana Debe Rabbi Yishmael, Trefa Chayas Firole. They're the ones who say, right? Remember that we saw that brisa just at the bottom of Membed Amid Aleph, that it was taught by the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. That why does it say Ben Hachaya Hanechel to Ben Hachaya Asher Lo Teachel? It was telling us that even treifot have the ability to live. So that is not a problem. It can still be a treifa, even according to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says that that animal can survive. Ella, no, wait. You have to understand the following. Savar like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, when we say that he's holding like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Damar Ksheirahi, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar not only said that it could survive, but he actually says that it's kosher. So the fact that he disagrees is not, it's not necessarily because the animal can survive, but in addition, he says that it is not in fact a treifa. So that was the bet of Basgar. Now we go to the Samech of Basgar. V'ha'ika chisaron. The Samech, this is not, like I said, it's not truly an acronym, but rather we're going to use the second letter here because we're going to have a couple of chets, and so we're going to do, we have to focus on the second letter to distinguish the words. So one that is missing, beshidra, if it's missing part of the spinal column, Ditanan, we have a Mishnah. Now, this Mishnah is in Oholot, and the Mishnah in Oholot is telling us about a human body's ability to convey tuma, not about animals, and not and kama chisaron b'shidra. And let me note the following: if you have a piece of a cadaver's flesh, that is going to be capable of creating tuma in an ohel. And of course, if you pick it up or touch it, you'll be tameh. But when it comes to bones alone, a bone, if you pick it up and touch it, you'll be tameh. But if you're just in the same building as it, that is not enough for tuma. Ditnan. But if you have a sufficient amount of it, as we're going to see in Rashi, a sufficient amount of bones, well, then you will be tameh. So let's get the details, and we'll then make an analogy from this case of human bones to the case of animals. So ditnan, kama chisaron b'shidra, how much needs to be missing of the spine? So take a look at Rashi. We're going to look at Rashi 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 lines up, 15 or 16 lines up from the bottom line, from the in the narrow lines of Rashi. Kama chisaron b'shidra. It's right opposite, at least in my Gemara, the Gilyon Hashas on the left-hand side of the page. So kama chisaron b'shidra. How much is missing from the spine? Shelo titamei ba'ohel, such that you will no longer, this spine will no longer have the ability to convey tuma by being in the same tent with it. Ella b'maga ub'masa, that this spine will now only convey tuma if you touch it or you carry it. Kedin etzem, like the regular law associated with the bone. Kisaora, that it can be as small as a barley corn. So de'ilu shidra shalema, because if you have a full spinal column, or gulgolet, or a full shalema, or a full skull, the rov minyano, or you have a majority of the bones present, or urov binyano, or a majority of the frame of the human being, all in bones, tanan ba'olot, where we learn in Maseches Olos, Parak Bet, Mishnah Aleph, Demitan min be'ohel. All of those are considered sufficient to create tuma within a tent. Basar, even though there is no flesh on them. But if you're missing enough, then it won't. So how much needs to be missing for a spinal column to be called incomplete? So Beis Shammai omrim shtei chulios. It's got to be missing 2 vertebrae. Beis Hillel omrim chol yachas. And Beis Hillel says, no, 1 is enough. The Amar of Yehuda, and now why did we bring this? Because there was a an Amoraic statement regarding this Mishnah, where Rav Yehuda said, Amar Shmuel, in the name of Shmuel, v'chein le trefa, that the same rule applies to make an animal a trefa, that if it's missing some of the spine, it is going to be a trefa. So isn't that need to be on your list of 18 items? And it's not on the list in our Mishnah. We didn't mention it. So doesn't that mean that there are actually 19 items? No, not necessarily. Hemses uveis hakosos de kachashavta de chashvat lehu betarte chashvina bechada. Look, we had in our Mishnah two cases. We had the omasum and the reticulum, and we said that if they have a puncture in them, that it is a problem. And we counted them as two in order to get to our 18. But don't count them as two, count them as one. And so as a result, if they count as one, well, then we've removed one from our count, and now we can add this animal of the missing spine. And so that is our answer. That in fact, when it comes to question number 2, it in fact is a good question. Sorry, I need to scroll my screen. It is a good question, and we are going to need to adjust the list in our Mishnah so that it leaves us with an open space that it can be counted as part of the 18. So next item, again, it's basgar. So now we're up to the gimel of the basgar. Baha'ika galuda. What about a flayed animal? That is also going to be considered a treifa. So, and again, so that's the gimel of the of basgar. So savarla Rabbi Meir demachsher. No, it must be that he holds like Rabbi Meir, who says that that animal is kosher, and so as a result, that's why it wasn't counted in our Mishnah. Va'ika charusa. So now we have the last letter of the basgar, the resh, and again, this one also starts with a chet, so that's why we didn't focus on the first letter in each case in these two cases. So what about if it's shriveled? And this is referring to a lung that has shriveled. So Mara man katanila, who is the one who taught about a gallbladder? Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Is Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. Apik Mara va'ayel charusa. So remove the gallbladder item and the puncture of the gallbladder and put in instead the shriveled. So as a result, we're just not holding like Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Yehuda. So we end up with 18. So we're still with 18 even after going through the Baskar 4. But 1 second, there are the 7 teachings that are about treifot that are not mentioned in our Mishnah. And now we're going to go through them individually. Number 1, Damar of Matna, Hai Buka de Atma de Shaf Meduchte Treifa. That if you have the ball of the thigh bone that comes out of its place, out of the socket, that is going to be a treifa. So v'amar rachish, and we're going to go through all 7 of the items now. So v'amar rachish bar papa mishmei derab laksa bukulya achas treifa. If the animal had a disease in one of its kidneys, it's going to be a treifa. Utnan, and we learned in a Mishnah that we're going to see in a couple of weeks on Nun Hey Amud Aleph, Nital Hatuchol Kshera, that if the spleen was removed, the animal is kosher. V'amar Rav Avira, and Rav Avira says about that, Mishmei de Rava, in the name of Rava, Lo Shanu Ela Nital Lo Shanu Ela Nital. That only applies if it was removed. Aval nikab treifa, but if it's got a hole in it, a puncture, well, then it's a treifa. So that also needs to be in our list. V'amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Shmuel, simanim shenidaldalu beruban treifa. But 1 second, what about Rabba bar bar Chana teaches number 4? If you have a majority of the trachea and the esophagus that they become detached from their where they're supposed to be within the animal, that's also going to be a treifa. V'amar Rabba bar Rav Shila, he teaches the last 3 of them. Amar of Matna, Amar Shmuel, all in the name of Shmuel. Nekra Sela miikara trefa. If a rib is removed from its where it's supposed to be, that would be a trefa. Vilgulgoles shenechbasa beruba, or if the skull was crushed, a majority of it was crushed. Ubasar hachofa es rov hakares berubo, or if the flesh that covers the first stomach is has some kind of issue with it. It's been removed, or it's not there, or it's diseased. Treifa, that's also going to be a treifa. So again, that's a seven list, seven more items that are not in the 18 in our Mishnah. And so how do you get to 18? So nikuve tamanya havu. Well, you know what? We had eight different cases of punctured items mentioned in our Mishnah. So chashvinu b'chad. Let's count all of them as if they were just one. So apik shav, v'ayil shav. So that will remove seven and we'll add these seven instead. Well, ihache psuke nami trei havu. But one second, the case of the severed items are two. If you're going to start saying that all items that have a puncture should all be treated together, well, then so too should the items that are severed be all treated together. So, uh, butts are luhu chada. So now that's missing one. V'od, and I'll tell you that we're missing another one. The Rav Avira Mishmei de Rava Nami Nekuvahi. With the one that Rav Avira said that when it's that the spleen being missing is maybe a kosher animal, but if the spleen's got a puncture, it's not a kosher animal. That's also a puncture. So now we're missing two out of the 18. So again, we started with 18. We removed seven because there were eight different ones that were all punctures, and then we removed and we put the new seven there. But the problem is one of those seven was also a puncture. So it's really that should go get grouped with all the punctures. And so now we've only added six. And we have two that involve severing of something, severing of the trachea, severing of what was the other severing? What was the other severing? The spinal cord was severed. So that's so we have two of those. So they should also be grouped together. So now that we've done that, we only have 16 in our list. So elahanach tarte de abkat lo tepuk. So you know what? The two cases that you removed, namely the severed leg, where we said, oh, maybe we're just holding the person who holds that there are 18 is just holding like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says that the animal is kosher. No, actually, we can now say that the severed leg is one of the treifas. And so that bring us up from 16 to 17. And then the other one is the flayed animal, where we said that the flayed animal must be that the person holds like Rabbi Meir, and that's why and that it's kosher. And so no, let's have him hold that the flayed animal is not kosher, and is it actually a treifa? And so now we have a second one to add, and so we are back at the number 18. And so as a result, we're now back at 18. We've justified the count of 18 treifas, but it turns out that that's not the only counting system. We're going to have tomorrow a different counting system that says there are 8 kinds of treifos. So for that categorization and how we can divide all the treifas into those 8 categories, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Brooke to you.